Elaine Mansfield. Okay. I'm Elaine Mansfield. I'm 62, and today is January 6th, 2008 at noon, and we're at Steve Smolin and Janet Wild's house in Hector, New York.
Who are you here with?
And I'm here with my husband, Vic.
Hi, I'm Vic Mansfield, 66, here on January 6, 2008 at noon with my dear wife at Janet and Steve's house in Hector, New York.
I think what I want to ask about is what are the most formative experiences in your life? So I'd like to start with something when you were young that really stands out as something powerful for you.
I'm afraid that the first thing that comes to my mind was a rather unpleasant experience I used to have fairly often. And that was when I was alone at night, which was pretty often. My mother had to go off and work and support us. No father around to provide financial support. And I used to get these hallucinations where I felt myself, along with the whole world, was shrinking down to a tiny little miniature size, and that all the objects in the room were sort of threatening and glowering at me, and the noises in the room, whether it was a clock ticking or traffic going by, were very mocking and hostile. And it used to scare the hell out of me. And I told my mother about it, and I don't think she could relate to it all. She just sort of dismissed it. And I felt that this is such a compelling experience, but she treats it as though it were an unreal thing. And the net result of this was an extremely isolating experience. I would have this repeatedly. I must have had it 100, 200 times or maybe more. And yet I couldn't share it with anybody, and I couldn't express my fear about it. And I would just have to wade through it, and in maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, it would sort of subside, and then I could go to sleep. But I'm afraid to say that that experience really molded me in a certain kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of introverted and lonely way. But I've also broken out of it. Otherwise, I couldn't talk about it like this. So that's one of the experiences that comes to my mind, early formative experience.
And exactly how did you change that, or how did that change in your life? What happened after that?
You know, I think it was almost biological. I think my male hormones came, and I just started growing, and physically and emotionally, and that faded into the background. Occasionally when I got very tired, it could happen again, but it always seemed to stall out at a certain place. It never went to a real psychotic state. So I sort of, I don't know, just got hardened to it in some sense, and it faded out. Maybe 20 years ago or so, it came back to me when I was doing deep psychological work, the actual experience a little bit. But it's not something I can conjure up. In memory I can, but I mean, I can't make the event, the experience really happen or anything like that. So it's a little hard to say precisely how it faded, except to say it was something like you outgrow almost biologically.
When this experience was happening to you, how did it affect the rest of your life outside your home?
Wow, that's a little hard to say. I think especially as a young kid, I was always a bit shy and lonely, and that may have been the seed of it or a contributing factor. It's hard for me to say exactly how it shaped me. I just remember it very vividly, though. And I think the big thing about it was the sense of not being able to share it with somebody, to connect with somebody, to have somebody sympathetically appreciate, hey, this is a kind of a weird thing. You know, today if I if I were a kid of that age, which was what, 4, 5, 6, 10, right in there, the whole span of years, they would take me and give me Ritalin or who knows what, some sort of medication. But, I wasn't even taken seriously by my mother, so it couldn't get very far. And I don't know if I could do more with that experience, except to say it was vivid.
Can you tell me something about your religious background?
My family was nominally Catholic, but not religious in the sense of like really being deeply dedicated to it. But somehow I ended up having a very natural and easy proclivity for religious devotion and the doctrines of the Catholic Church. In second grade, I ended up going to a Catholic elementary school where the Sisters of Mercy were teaching, and I fell into it quite easily. Prayer and reflection and so on, and I went to mass, but nobody else in my family went. Communion, that sort of thing. And it was an important period, although it left some terrific scars on me, I'm sorry to say, especially when I got into conflict with my sexuality. But I eventually found so many conflicts between my life especially as a scientist and as a Catholic, that when I was in college, I just broke out. I couldn't sustain being a Catholic and being who I was in the rest of my life. And also, I don't know if I'm sorry to say, but I must say that my own sexual drives and the extremely repressive attitude about sexuality that was instilled in me when I was a kid really came into conflict. And so then I threw it over, and I didn't know what to believe in. My only clear thought at the time, and I remember this when I was at Dartmouth, and I can remember still the place I was on campus. I said, I just want to make the world a little bit better than I found it. And that was my religion for a while. There was a certain idealism in that, and it got expressed in a number of different ways. And then, of course, later on, thanks to psychedelic drugs, I then became very serious about the spiritual life, meditation, study of scripture, and so on, of different traditions. So religion has been important to me and relatively natural. But now I would say I'm very keen on appreciating the religious views of a number of different traditions, but not being a strict adherent of any one of them, except the one that my dear teacher taught me, and that is one where you drink deeply from the different wells, not a dilettante, but you don't circumscribe yourself or limit yourself by any of them, because that's an antiquated approach. But anyhow, I could go on and on with this, so I will leave it at that.
So, since I know something about you, I can ask you this. How did an Italian boy who was brought up in the housing projects in Norwalk, Connecticut, end up at Dartmouth?
That too is another miracle. My mother never went past, I think it was 8th grade. Her youngest sister, Rose, was the only one who ever graduated from high school in that family. My father's family I had basically no contact with. So nobody was interested, or I won't say interested, but nobody had opportunity for serious advanced education. And yet somehow I was a behavioral problem as a kid, in grammar school, but then I sort of turned a corner. I remember distinctly in 9th grade, and academic stuff was just easy. And I got a lot of strokes, a lot of positive feedback for good grades and this and that, and yet I could play sports and chase young ladies around, and so I racked up pretty nice grades and so on, and in high school and got a big fat scholarship. And I was really grateful for it. I loved Dartmouth. It was a tremendous opening, culturally and intellectually. And from there, it was on to Cornell and the rest. So the Dartmouth thing was just a piece of good luck that came out of good high school record.
So tell me how it changed you to be in that environment. You said that it was transforming. How was it transforming?
You mean the
At Dartmouth?
Well, you have to realize that in my house, high culture was turning on the radio. And Dartmouth seemed like, wow, so classy. I got there and I said, they made a mistake. They're confusing me with some other Vic Mansfield. How could this be? How could it be here? And in fact, there was a little ceremony where the president of the university or the college actually signed you in. And I didn't take it seriously, or not take it seriously. I didn't really believe I was a Dartmouth student until I got his signature. I said, well, now they got me. They may have made a mistake, but it's too late now. I'm going to stay. And I was just thrilled at the opportunities to study everything from philosophy to physics to art history to literature, language, and be around all this beauty and sophistication and all this set of challenging values, some of which were good, some of which were utter stupidity. And I got involved in some of them, like booze and this and that. Although not to any really serious extent, like a problem, but, undergraduate experimentation. And it was just an enormous flowering of what the world was about, what kind of talents I had. And I took off in the direction of physics. And I don't regret it. It was, still is, one of the most beautiful things a person can study if you have the hardware for it. Meaning you got to have a certain kind of weird brain chemistry to really appreciate theoretical physics. And I also value deeply the liberal arts side of Dartmouth. It wasn't just a school where one studied mathematics and physics and sciences, but there was an appreciation that the world is much larger than that. And that's always been important to me, and it shows up in my books. So Dartmouth was a very formative experience. And then Cornell was a bit narrower in terms of the intellectual focus, that's what graduate school is about. But I loved Cornell too. Yeah.
So when you were at Cornell, it was the 60s, the famous 60s. What happened to you at Cornell in regard to that big cultural revolution?
The 60s, those are very romantic years. I was such a straight arrow, worked so hard, did physics and this and that. Then the next thing you know, well, I guess we have to confess, largely under your tutelage, we got into smoking dope and LSD and mescaline and psilocybin and all this business. And graduate school, I managed to keep it going, but it was sort of like a lower priority. And then we got deeply into politics, Vietnam War, hell no, we won't go, anti-draft, and serious political action where the damn people almost threw us in jail when we were doing that thing up there in Canada and the bridges and so on. And it was a very exciting period, and one where it was deeply disturbing to see how screwed up things were, and yet at the same time there was this perhaps naive view that things could really change for the better. There really could be a societal, cultural transformation, a new age, the age of Aquarius. Unfortunately, that didn't quite turn out the way most of us had hoped. But fortunately, I didn't get stuck there in that political turmoil. I came across the most benign force in my entire life, the good Anthony Damiani at the American Brahmin bookstore. And then all the drugs, all the politics, all that crap went out the window. And what became the center of my life, that is you and spiritual discipline, took center stage. And then raising kids started when we were at Cornell. And there was a lot of other things in between, running off to Stanford for a while and coming back. But anyway, the 60s.
Tell me something about when you got married.
When I got married, it was the culmination of a long, stumbling process, in the sense that I was always drawn to you, but I was so fearful of making a mistake, or not able to hold my commitment with you, or something like this, that I waffled back and forth. But finally, it became clear that that was just silly. And we had a wedding which was one of the most powerful events in my life. The emotional intensity of it, the love that was flowering in so many directions, made people who were attending the wedding faint. It was quite extraordinary. We were saying our vows and people dropping on the floor. And so it was a really special event, obviously. And I don't know if I should mention it or not. I almost got in a fist fight with the best man. So it was a great experience, and it seems like yesterday, and yet it seems like a previous incarnation. So it's strange business.
So after you got married, in the middle of being a graduate student, you went to California. Why did you go to California?
California. Well, at the time, probably just about the same time that I was getting involved with Anthony and meditation and that sort of discipline, psychology just blossomed for me, not just as an academic study, but especially the unearthing of my own psychology and working through various psychological problems and issues and this and that. And so to further that process, we went out to California, went to what was called in those days the Human Institute, and it was an enormous exploration of the unconscious. And eventually I got a job working in a mental hospital half-time, an experimental ward in San Jose State, very Jungian flavor and R.D. Laing flavor. Tremendous opportunity. Then I ran out of money, and through a whole sequence of fortunate events, got a half-time job at Stanford University in the astrophysics group, and managed to do astrophysics and deep psychological work at the same time that I was also popping a little LSD now and again. It was, I guess, the culmination of the 60s. And it was quite a active and intense time. And I'm glad it's over. It makes me feel old just to think about it.
So then you came back to Cornell and Ithaca. And what happened after that?
Well, I wanted to finish my PhD. I had done all my coursework. I'd written about a half a dissertation, and then I left, went to California for like almost a year and a half. And somehow I felt called back to finish that piece of work. Even if I never used the PhD, I just wanted to say, yeah, I did my PhD in physics and I'm done. So also, I think in a deep way, Anthony Damiani was calling me back to a closer association with him and the work that he was doing and what became really the focus of my life. So I went back. It was actually very hard getting restarted. I was still sort of a California hippie, trying to be a graduate student in science. So it was a bit of a conflicted time, but eventually uh, I had a son. We had a son, and that sort of tightened up my act. And I finished my PhD, and then I got a job as a carpenter, which is a bit strange. You get an academic degree from a Ivy League institution, then you go off and tear out the men's room of the YMCA. So that was the first job I had. Then I got a postdoc at Cornell, and then from there, another almost accidental event was Tony Avini from Colgate University coming by, giving a talk and trying to recruit for a position that they had open. And I didn't apply for it. I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to sit at Anthony's feet every day for 5:30 meditation and not go chasing around anywhere else. I was willing to tear out a men's room if necessary to make that happen. But fate intervened, and off I went to Colgate, which I don't regret. Colgate has been an enormous blessing for me in so many ways, academically, professionally, financially, and in terms of fulfillment, being able to teach, being able to learn and love students, learn from students, love them, has been tremendously important to me. It also gave me the opportunity to write some. So that was a good turning point, going from Cornell to Colgate.
So how did you get involved with writing about science and Buddhism?
Science and Buddhism. Well, of course, the science thing came in high school. I always had a love for science. And then, of course, one of the traditions that Anthony was so good at instructing us in was Buddhism. And so I took a natural liking to Buddhism. My first sort of love affair with Buddhism was the Zen form. There was a certain purity to it. All that, the trappings and the thick dogma that came with Catholicism just were not present. It was that attempt to look straight into the mind and see what the reality of the world and yourself is. And to me, that was such a direct empirical approach, and one that you could actually implement yourself. You didn't have to go through any bureaucracy. So that was appealing. But then the Dalai Lama came by in 1979, his first trip to the U.S. And he had a tremendous impact on me, as he did on a lot of us at Wisdom's Goldenrod, as he did on you. And so my interest in Buddhism turned more to its Tibetan expression. And I've always wanted to weave together somehow my inner life and outer life, my outer life being that of a physicist, and my inner life being interested in meditation, psychological matters, Buddhism, Hinduism, this and that. And the Dalai Lama himself asked for help in trying to make collaborations and dialogue between Buddhism and science. And so it was a natural progression from having these two interests and being influenced by the Dalai Lama to work towards writing about Tibetan Buddhism and modern physics, which is the title of the book that's about to come out in a few weeks. And so the most beautiful thing recently is the fact that Dalai Lama wrote an introduction to the book, Tibetan Buddhism and Modern Physics, toward a union of love and knowledge, with an introduction by the Dalai Lama. Wow! The little kid from Norwalk, Connecticut, who used to sit and hallucinate, scare the hell out of himself, written a book with the Dalai Lama on the front. Wow. It's amazing.
So, would you like to say anything about being a father?
Oh, Jesus. excuse me. My own experiences of my father were very brief, very early, and deeply wounding. And I never had any relationship with him. And it feels like, and always has, like a big black hole where there's nothing there but yearning. Yearning for something I'll never know. So the idea of having sons and developing the beautiful relationship that has flowered among us has been an extraordinary privilege and extraordinary satisfying experience where you see these young people grow up into really unique individuals, not somebody you wanted to stamp out in your image, but they're having their own destiny, their own proclivities. You can see sort of echoes of some of your faults and some of your strengths in them, but they are their own people, who they are. And to be able to relate to them in an intimate, non-manipulative way is a great privilege. I'm not saying I'm perfect at the art, but it's been deeply satisfying, and it's helped me heal my own father-son wounds from their side, from my relationship with them. I have managed to see a little bit about what it's like to have love between a father and a son. So that's been a tremendous gift. And one of the things that's very clear is that it could not have happened without you and your nurturing. I don't mean just cooking, nurturing at an emotional level. In fact, you made so much of this happen, supported me in everything from graduate school on up, all the way through, and would sacrifice your own needs, your own career, and your own desires on behalf of the family and especially me. And sometimes this was very hard on you, and because of that, it was hard on me. So I would say the two things that are most important in my life are you, the family, that whole thing, and the spiritual life that I developed in conjunction with you, because it's just as important to you, the spiritual disciplines, as it is to me. And our marriage has been a fusion of those two pieces of our life. You know, just the family, male-female thing, and also an attempt at relating to the transcendent. So in reflection, you know, if I were just listening to this thing from the outside, I'd say, wow, that guy's a lucky guy. And you know what? It's true. He is a lucky guy. Yeah.
Which brings me to the unlucky part.
Oh, yes.
So you want to talk about getting sick?
Yeah. Well, I got cancer, a non-curable form of lymphoma, a very aggressive and rare form. And in the summer of 2006, it became clear something was really screwed up, and it's a long, agonizing history, and a lot of medical intervention and up and down, and it's put me through an enormous number of difficult emotions, fear of dying. I've always been afraid of dying. In fact, the first question I remember asking Anthony or talking to him about the first issue was, Anthony, I'm afraid of dying. And I remember just what he said. I remember the motions of his hands as he was trying to make some sort of response to that. And so I'm really wrestling right now with my mortality. And some days I'm okay, and other days I feel just, wow, this is just the worst possible thing. There's going to be annihilation of Vic. It's over. And not a rack left behind. And then other days I say, no, I'm more than just this finite ego. I am more than just this body-mind complex. And that's the part I have to cultivate. That's the part I have to work with. But it's been an extremely tough time, and it's been tough because it affects other people like you, my sons, my friends. On the other hand, if it weren't for you especially you, my family, and beautiful people like Steve and Janet, they would just have to take me and just fill me with drugs or something. I would be psychotic. I just wouldn't know what the hell to do with myself. So now I go through ups and downs, but at least I'm not stoned out doing it. I'm just dealing with it. But I don't see how the normal person or the average person deals with dying. I can't understand it. So, thanks to decades of spiritual effort, I do have some anchor outside the ego, but I'll admit that anchor slips sometimes. Sometimes I feel it's all a bunch of words and it's just finite little Vic, and when he's done, that's the end of the show. But then other times, I think about other reincarnations. I think about the bodhisattva ideal, the ideal that my highest priority, which I don't embody very well, but my highest priority is not for my own comfort, my own ease, my own satisfaction, but for the relief of suffering of all sentient beings. And when I can really hold on to that, both in this life and the next, then a little bit of peace falls on me. A little bit of resignation that part of living is dying. There's no way out. Except the same way for everybody. And it's an ongoing process. I'm hardly done with it. Right now I feel like, oh man, I'm going to live forever. Don't worry about it. But there were a few times in the last 6 months where I thought I was very close to the edge. In fact, I was very close to dying. And the fact that I didn't die makes you wonder, well, there must be some reason why I wasn't just taken, if you like to think that there's an agency outside yourself that controls these things. On the other hand, it could be just random noise. I didn't die. Okay, so here I am. I'm working on it. Anyway, it's the most powerful thing in my life, and it's still going on, and I can't give you definitive answers to anything except to say it's never out of my mind.
What kind of choices are you making about what to do with your life because you have cancer?
Well, I had to give up teaching, so I don't do that. And that's a sad thing because I really love the classroom. I love the students. And what I'm doing now is trying to focus on pushing this Buddhism and science collaboration forward. I feel that I'm a tiny, tiny piece of the Dalai Lama's effort at bringing about some, I don't want to say unification, but some positive interaction and constructive engagement between science and Buddhism. And so I'm trying to devote myself to discussions of that. Right now, I'm not quite strong enough to go out and give talks very far away, but in the neighborhood, I plan to give some talks, and then I have some scheduled for, a few plane trips away. And so I want to continue that work. I have some new ideas about writings on Buddhism and science that I would like to get down, although I'm not quite in the shape where I can start a serious writing project yet. I'm hoping to get stronger so that I can actually do this. And if I don't, well, then I don't. But at least I got a piece of it done. And anybody who's really serious about the topic of physics and Buddhism, I don't know, this sounds a bit bold. We'll have to look at my book and see what I did. Not that that's the last word by any means. But so I'm focused on that project, on the science and religion connection. And I only wish my dear teacher Anthony were around so I could give him a copy of my new book. Anyway.
I know that you wanted to take the students in your Tibet class to see the Dalai Lama. So what happened this fall around that experience of trying to take your students to see the Dalai Lama?
Well, I almost should let you answer this question since you were there and I wasn't. But we did have tickets. There was a whole lot of effort to get the students from Colgate to Ithaca College, a couple-hour bus ride away, to see the Dalai Lama, give a big talk, and so on. And just before it, I was swelling up from this cancer and went and got some. No, actually, what happened at that time was I had a tremendous allergic reaction to one of the antibacterial drugs they were giving me. That caused me to get all swollen up and this and that. So then they gave me some diuretics. The trouble is, the drug that I was originally reacting to was a sulfur drug, and then the diuretics were. And I felt that when they gave me the diuretics, it made me worse. My heart fluttered more, or my heart palpitated, or just felt strange. And I told this to the cardiologist at the time, and he says, yes, I hear you, and so on, but this is the best thing for you. And he loaded me up with more, and my heart stopped. I just went into such a fast heartbeat that I couldn't get any oxygen, and I passed out. And so for 2 days, I was entirely unconscious, and during that time, the students saw the Dalai Lama. I never did. So it was a very strange experience. The Dalai Lama's in Ithaca, and I'm unconscious, getting shocked, according to you, maybe, 7, 8, 9 times to make my heart start again. So I was absolutely on the threshold of death, and the Dalai Lama's in the neighborhood. I don't know what to make of that. I'm not saying there was any deep connection, but at least temporally, in terms of time events, that's what was going on. And then I eventually got out of my 2 days worth of drugs-induced stupor, and the Dalai Lama left, and I have been trying to recover from that. Plus, my cancer is certainly in the background, sometimes in the foreground all the time. And it's challenging. It's very challenging. And obviously, as you know, it demands a lot of you. And you have been so incredibly capable and caring that without exaggeration, without the least exaggeration, you have saved my life repeatedly in decisions you've made, in actions you've taken, and the attentiveness you show all the time. So it's extraordinary to have this kind of debt to somebody, both love and debt. It's amazing.
What did the Dalai Lama say when he was told that you had had cardiac arrest?
My good friend Lauren tells me that she went and talked to the Dalai Lama, hoping that he would sort of like put a good prayer in my direction or something. And so she explains who I was and that I had cardiac arrest and all this. And he nodded and listened, made sure he knew who she was talking about. And then, according to Lauren, as the Dalai Lama was leaving the room, just in the threshold of the next room, he spins around and laughs. Ha ha ha, everybody's got to go. And a fairly shocking statement. Now, there's one way I can take that and say, wow, what a calloused, crazy thing. And then the other way is, no, he was like a lion roaring in the face of death. Yeah, everybody's got to go, and I'm not terrified to go. But of course, I'm not the Dalai Lama either, so I am terrified. But anyway, he then later in the day said to the large audience that they shouldn't expect any great help from him, or people shouldn't be going to him asking for special favors and so on. So Lauren then felt very bad, like she was one of the people he was criticizing, or at least implicitly saying had it wrong. But then she talked to his main translator, that lovely man, Thupten Jimpa, and he said, no, no, don't worry about it. You're doing exactly the right thing. And he made sure the Dalai Lama was clear on who I was and what the deal was and so on. So he too apparently talked to the Dalai Lama. And in fact, maybe the Dalai Lama saved my life. I don't know. I don't want to say that for sure because it tries to make me too special. Like, oh yeah, the Dalai Lama cares a lot about Vic. He personally intervened to make sure that the demons of death did not drag him off. That's crap, you know. But he could have said or sent a nice prayer, healing vibe or something, you know. But I'm so grateful that Anthony introduced us to the Dalai Lama and made us clear about what a spiritual giant he is. And Anthony's very much a presence in my life too, despite the fact that he died in '84. So when I talk to you about subjects like this, I get extremely grateful and I say, what a greedy, stupid fool to want more out of life, want a longer life. But on the other hand, more of this wouldn't be bad.
Tell me about your relationship to the place where you live.
Well, when we were still at Cornell, I was a graduate student there. We bought this old farmhouse, and I mean, it was a disaster. No siding on all but one side, falling down foundations, slopey roof full of holes and bad business, wind blowing through it, snow collecting on the inside of the house in heavy weather. But it was on an extraordinary piece of property, looking out over the hills of Hector, New York, nestled up against the Green Mountain National Forest, across the street, up the hill, all surrounded by this beautiful woods, the National Forest. So we bought the place almost for nothing. And that was '72, and we have poured an enormous amount of energy and money into fixing the house. Originally, I did a lot of the carpentry and brute work, like rebuilding foundations when a house is already sitting on it, which is a terrifically ugly and dirty job. So we did all that, and then as I got wealthier, I hired people who knew what they were doing. But more important than the physical transformations, or at least equally important, is this tremendous love affair we developed with the land. The sense of place, the beauty, the rearing of children in this extraordinary environment, the growing of garden vegetables and love in one location year after year, despite working 100 miles away at Colgate. So we had to have two houses, and one was like a weekday workhouse where we would stay and then come back to the main house. And because our attachment to the land grew so strong, and we also wanted to do something constructive for the larger world, we signed off on a conservation easement where you and I agreed that we would have a third party, the Finger Lakes Land Trust, monitor the land and make us adhere, or whoever owns it, you know, the next person or persons who own it have to adhere to the same very strict guidelines, much stricter than the National Forest in terms of cell phone towers, drilling, you know, you have to have a 10-year forestry plan, so on and so forth. So it felt good to give that to posterity. When Vic and Elaine are long gone, they're not going to turn that into a big Walmart turkey farm. It's still going to have that natural beauty, which it now has, or at least a good echo of it anyway. And that in some ways frees us up to love the land even more. Because if you love the land and you say, oh, but then somebody's going to take it over and clear cut the woods and put up a bunch of McDonald's franchises or something, there's a certain sadness to that. But knowing that that cannot happen, makes you love more freely, I think.
So since you're dealing with your death every day, what do you envision happening in death, either on this side, on the earth side? Like, what do you imagine might happen with your ashes and that sort of thing? And what do you envision happening on the other side?
Wow, you ask tough questions. Um, well, I have to admit that one of the things I worry about is having a long, agonizing experience with intense pain. This is not something I relish. Who would? So that's one of the things I worry about, think about. And as far as the dying from this side, I think of how much misery it'll cause, not just me, but you and the other people around me. At the same time, I also think about how much extraordinary love and support I get from my community, my spiritual community. They have been, continue to be, and I hope will be in the future, really present for me, really holding me up. And I feel completely unworthy of that kind of love and support, but I'm deeply grateful for it. And then as far as what happens at the moment of death, well, if I believe the Tibetan story, there's after-death states, recapitulation of a lot of experiences, and a certain amount of terror and a certain amount of bliss, and then something like deep dreamless sleep and a new incarnation. Now, I have to admit I have some, what should we say, reservations about how deeply I'm committed to that belief, but it's the best thing I have right now. And I have to keep in mind that I have an anchor outside of this body-mind complex, this finite ego. Otherwise, the whole thing is futile. Otherwise, why make such a big fuss over this temporary construction? It has to be for some larger purpose, for some bodhisattva ideal, for something that transcends the individual. But it's hard for me to hang on to that. I'm not a saint. I may aspire to be one, but I'm a long way.
Is there anything more you want to say?
I never thought I could love anybody, anything, as deeply as I love you. I always thought love was about romance, sex, excitement, but I realize it's so much deeper than that. That it comes with commitments which cause pain on all sides, but that pain can be absorbed in a larger framework of real love. And that is a surprising gift. And I thank you for it. You are my guru of love.